And hello, everyone, and welcome to the Copyright 2.0 show, episode number 258. No, 358. I was right the first time. I tripped myself up. My name is 358, 358. Hey, that adds up. 3 plus 5 equals 8. That's how you can remember this episode number. My name is Jonathan Bailey. I am from the site Plagiarism Today, which can be seen below in my little doobly-doo type thing there. And joining me, as usual, is a man of great respect, attorney Evan Sherriz, and also, as I found out just a few minutes ago, art connoisseur Evan Sherriz. Yes, Evan.
Yep.
How are you doing?
It's good to be here. I'm doing well. Going to talk a little copyright, drink a little coffee. Yes, and I'm sitting here below my favorite new poster that I, as an art connoisseur, got from Winner's Home Sense. It's where the real artists go to sell their items. And I was actually undecided whether I wanted like the camera at like the good angle for me or like to get the entire awesome poster.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And
yes,
it's truly beautiful. You ever notice how many
I think it's good representation.
You ever notice when you're trying to strain to see something on like the other on your computer monitor? You do the thing where you're like craning your neck, and it doesn't help because it's out of frame of the shot. It's not like if you move your head, the camera moves with you. So it's like just realizing I look like a total idiot over here doing that. But no, look, it's a cool poster. And real fast, I know you have something you would like to remind all the kids listening at home. Don't do drugs.
Right. Don't do drugs, of course. And then, second to that is don't take anything I say as legal advice because it's not. It's just a general commentary on, today's stories in copyright. And now that that's out of the way, John, do you want to tell us what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, we got a lot to go over. We're catching up. We've had a little time away, a little time apart. A time apart always kills us. But no, we got first off. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
That's my fault. I was in High Point, North Carolina with my new employer, Malfi Home Furniture, and we had an awesome show, and I got to meet a few other lawyers in the business, and then obviously a lot of just people in the business. We had a great show. I was down there for 2 weeks. Thank you to the people of High Point, North Carolina for being very gracious and very welcoming to us. And, I'll leave it at that, and you can go ahead and
real fast,
stories that we are going to be talking about today.
Real fast, before we get into that, how close is High Point to, like, the coast of North Carolina? I know nothing about where it is.
It's pretty far west, actually.
Okay.
It's western North Carolina.
All right, I had a feeling because I had a feeling with the name High Point, it was probably in the mountains. That sounds like the kind of name a mountain town would give itself. Well, it's high up, and it's on the point of a mountain. Let's call it High Point.
I thought of that, actually, like, how did this place get its name? And I think that was definitely it. Someone in the 1800s were like, let's settle here, and then what should we call it? It's higher than everything else around us, so I think.
Well, there's a town in South Carolina called Moncks Corner, MONCK' Corner. And you might ask, well, where did it get that weird name? Well, because a guy named Monk set up a gas station there, and a town sprang up around it, so it became Moncks Corner. There you go. Usually, town names have very uninspiring stories behind them, is what you learn.
Oh, man, we get distracted by the funniest things.
We do. So anyways, while we're talking about copyright stuff, we have a lot to go over. First off, we have a new bill that's coming up to change the royalties that are paid by radio stations. Royalties by radio stations. Amazon and Harper Collins have reached a pretty significant deal that hopefully will blunt another battle like we saw earlier. We have a big ruling in the the Iron Man composer lawsuit, one that could potentially change drastically how work for hire agreements are handled. We have a Game of Thrones leak. I know you're kind of a Game of Thrones buff, is my understanding. So, or are you just like a guy that
I dabble?
You dabble in Game of Thrones. I don't think anyone ever dabbled in Game of Thrones. That sounds dangerous. We also have Justice Department considering an overhaul in the consent decrees that currently bind the music PROs. A very interesting case involving a site with a quote-unquote browser wrap license agreement that managed to get held up in court. Grooveshark suffering yet another court loss and now facing some pretty significant damages. Three's Company parody ruled a fair use, and we say goodbye to a long, long friend of the show. We say goodbye to Aereo as what would probably be the swan song story for Aereo, and it feels like decades long, but in reality it was only a couple of years long battle with the broadcasters. So yes, it is a very, very full show.
John, I feel like we say that every show. We're like, this is the last story, but it never ends up being a last story.
I know. Well, this time around,
even this one won't be it.
It's looking kind of bad after this one, though. We're talking about settlements here, so it seems like we're coming around to the end here. But yeah, first off, we have to kind of talk a little bit about AM/FM radio. You know, that thing that you listen to in your car when your CD, your Sirius XM, your MP3 player are all broken at once. The
point that I want to make about that statement is that coming from a 10-hour road trip, I guess coming both ways, back and forth to North Carolina, is that, you know what, I listen to a lot of radio, and so it still has its role. So
yeah, okay.
Road trips are always great for remembering the importance of AM/FM radio.
And I've got to say this: the most mad I have seen Crystal in recent years was when the rock station she was listening to changed format to a country one. Dude, she was inconsolable for like a week. Her drive to work was just ruined by that. Or as Stewie would say, ruined by that.
Well, you could always put on a satellite radio or something like that when you're, or get Spotify on. But the thing is about driving in the North Carolina mountains is that I lost my signal. I lost my 4G. So I was stuck with terrestrial radio, and I'm glad I did because I got to learn a few new artists and otherwise hear the same song over and over again, which was the not so good part about it. But anyways, on to the Fair Play, Fair Pay Act. Only 15 minutes into the starting of the show.
Yeah, we're getting there. I promise you, we're getting there.
This new act deals.
It's only 8.5 minutes. Gosh darn it! Don't exaggerate.
It deals with terrestrial performance rights, which is a fancy way of saying AM/FM radio, for sound recordings. So this new act would make radio stations have to pay for performing, have to pay the performing artists as well as the songwriters. They currently only pay the songwriters for when they play songs, and now they have to pay the performing artists as well. The bill basically amends Section 106, subsection 6 of the Copyright Act to eliminate the distinction between different kinds of radio, that being internet and satellite radio, and over-the-air AM/FM radio with regards to who they pay. They strike out the word digital in the reference to digital audio, simply that it reads audio, and now that provision applies to everyone. And so they'll have to pay the performance artists as well.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting how much you can change the game by striking one word, realistically. One meaningful word, and if you are an AM/FM radio station, or especially for like a network like Clear Channel, this has to be... It has to feel like the sword is hanging over your head a little bit with this, because
the bill has pretty broad support.
Yeah.
Other than of course the National Association of Broadcasters, it's a bipartisan bill, which is obviously extremely rare, and it's got broad support because although obviously the big broadcasters are going to have to pay more, it does a pretty good job of protecting small broadcasters, which I think was a probably large concern for a big swath of individuals, because anytime you got a new regulation, you don't want to stop small businesses from being able to make a living. The bill protects small broadcasters, public broadcasters and non-commercial broadcasters and college radios, by basically having a provision that says that you only pay a royalty rate of flat $500 per year if your revenue is below $1 million.
Yeah, and that's still not nothing. I mean, believe me, I've done college radio, and you'd be hard pressed to get $500 out of an entire audience full of college radio DJs. But it can be done, You know what I mean? It's not nothing, but you're right. It's not a death knell either. It's not going to kill college radio. It's not going to kill small broadcast either. And I don't think it's going to push too many small stations to sort of switch formats to talk radio or whatever. And we've already been seeing kind of the push away from music radio anyway, especially during drive time and, you know, key times of the day. So I don't think it's going to necessarily change that. But yeah, it's kind of bizarre because this is something I learned. The United States is the only country in the world where this is true right now, where the recording artist is not paid royalties for terrestrial radio. So we are alone.
Well, hopefully not for long, and that's what usually signifies that the law needs to change when you're the only country in the world that still doesn't pay performing artists when
Next
play
up,
one of their sound recordings on the radio.
Next up, the metric system. Where are we going to hit?
I was in an argument with a few friends, okay, and I'm Canadian. I know everyone knows this, and I was talking about hockey. I'm a big hockey fan, and I was trying to explain to them how hockey is clearly should be known as an American sport because of all the fighting and the hitting, and how it's much more physical than a lot of other major sports. And in trying to make this point that hockey should be considered American, I said something like, "Oh, you don't think that a sport where people are fighting and hitting and skating at 40 kilometers an hour should be?" And so they, as soon as I said that, they jumped on me. They were like, "Oh, I think you just lost the argument by saying how fast that they skate in kilometers when trying to argue that it's an American sport." And I basically conceded the argument at that point.
Yeah, that was the wrong pitch, dude.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting though is in Britain they still use in the UK they still use miles per hour.
Really?
Had the metric system, use miles per hour and miles in distance. It's confusing. So
all right, well,
now you know. Knowing's half the battle.
Now, the more you know. What else about this bill that I find interesting? Pandora and Sirius, for example, are currently subject to different rates in what they actually end up paying artists. And this bill also makes it a single rate for all non-interactive streaming services. So services like Spotify, where you can choose what song you want, they pay a different rate than services like Pandora and Sirius, whereas the user, you're stuck basically with what they want to play for you. Although
which makes
many
sense.
question the liking system of Pandora, and so if you can like things back and forth, does that blend the lines of interactive or not? Well, today it's still considered to be non-interactive. So that's one of the other things that this bill would do. It makes those services pay the same rate.
Which is interesting, because remember a few years ago, Pandora went out and bought like this teeny tiny Midwest radio station in order to try to secure better royalty rates. Not even significantly better royalty rates, just slightly better royalty rates, because it was going to change into a different class of broadcaster. So, you know, it's one of those things. This seems to me like the goal really is to level the playing field. If you stream or play music, these are the rates you pay. Everybody go home. You know, that seems to be the goal of this bill. I think it does overall a pretty good job, while, as you said, still protecting smaller broadcasters. So
yeah, seems like a reasonable move. And I don't know if you caught this as well, John. This is, I think, the last thing I want to talk about for this is that the bill also proposes royalties for pre-72 sound recordings, which is obviously something we've been talking about for a while. So that would hopefully quell a lot of lawsuits. Although of note, it doesn't extend a lot of other rights available to the owners of sound recordings, like the reclamation right that we talked about last podcast.
You know, with this pre-1972 sound recording
so
stuff, actually, you just went mute on me. So, but yeah, the thing about pre-1972 sound recordings, it feels like we're going to federalize that one tiny step at a time, and that's just the way it's going to happen. And Evan, you're okay. There you go. You're back now. All right. I don't know what that was. Evan is waiting on real internet access in his house. For the record, he is still currently waiting for big boy internet. So we will see how that works out next week.
Unfortunately, Verizon has not been accommodating to myself, and so we are waiting for Comcast to come in. But as always, it's going to take forever. So I apologize if I end up being delayed, John.
Yeah, it's all right. Not a problem. We will make it work. I promise you, we will make it work. Okay, Amazon and HarperCollins. This one's fascinating because remember last year, I think it was, Amazon and Hachette went to war with one another over everything from ebook royalty rates to the price for wholesale physical copies of books, and it got ugly. Amazon stopped accepting pre-orders, was really delaying shipping of books, refused to carry Hachette ebooks. Well, HarperCollins is the last of the major publishers to not have signed a deal, renewed their contract with Amazon. Why do they make these contracts all come up at once? It seems kind of inefficient to have a mad scramble for your contract lawyers. But anyways, they're the last ones. They have now signed a deal. They have averted a similar war. My understanding now is all 5 of the major publishers now have some kind of deal with Amazon for several years now. So this should not come up again for a while. So peace be with you, publishing business, basically. Is what
I think it's good for consumers. Amazon controls 60% of the market when it comes to the distribution. And if you're on bad terms with Amazon, then most consumers may not be able to find your work. Consumers like the simplest way of finding your work, and I would gamble that Amazon is probably most millennials, if not everybody's, first attempt when they go look and, hey, I heard about this book, let me try and find it on Amazon. So it's good for HarperCollins, it's good for consumers, and hopefully this means it'll be quiet for a while.
Well, I'll say this. Amazon's my price check for almost everything, not just books, quite frankly. In fact, there's a lot of times that I'll get like a Groupon or something, and it's like, hey, buy this headset. I'm like, well, let me check the reviews, and B, the price on Amazon to make sure you're actually offering me a deal. And 9 times out of 10, I find Amazon has the exact same item cheaper than even the special deal being provided me through this couponing site. And
but the deal was special, John.
Oh,
it was a special deal.
Yes, it was special. That it was $4 more than what Amazon was selling it for, with free shipping. It's like, oh, come on. Yeah, it's one of those things. If I can trivially find it cheaper, it's not a special deal, guys. Come on. Let's all be realistic.
I remember on the topic of ebooks and regular books, reading a survey about people's preferences as to would they rather read the book in a Kindle Fire, etc., or get the paper copy. What would you guess is the preference generally?
I would guess the preference is paper still. It's probably going to be that way for a little while longer. And the reason I say that is because I think of my own preferences. And it's like there's a lot of things I like about reading ebooks. I like being able to search for things. I like having my place automatically preserved across devices. I like a lot of things, but at the end of the day, I find reading an ebook on an electronic device very tiring. It's very exhausting on my eyes and my mind for some reason, where I can sit there and read a paper book until, the cows come home and it doesn't bother me. So I don't know. Maybe it's just something to do with, the backlighting. Maybe it's something to do with the text on the screen or the way it's displayed. But whatever it is, for me, I just do better with physical books. That, and I know which I'd rather have stolen when I'm reading on a subway or something.
That last point is something I haven't thought of, but for me, it's just the feel of the pages in my hands, and that sound the page makes when you turn it over. At the same time, if I'm going on vacation, an e-reader is just so much more convenient. It's lighter. I can fit so much more content. So, there's perks to both. Anyways, Iron Man.
Yeah.
So this was a really, really interesting case, and it centers around an authorship dispute between someone who was hired for work and someone who hired that person for work, but the lawsuit wasn't between those two people.
No.
It was between the individual hired for the work and a third party. So you might be wondering, what?
Yeah.
And I would agree with you when you asked that question. So here's the facts here. Jack Urbont, and I hope I'm pronouncing that
it's as good as I've got.
He claims that Ghostface Killah, the rapper, sampled an Iron Man theme from the 70s that he wrote on 2 tracks that Sony used in one of its films, although the fact escapes me now. It's probably, I guess, the new Iron Man, but I don't have that in front of me. Anyways, so a court granted a summary judgment to Sony because they determined that Jack was not the author and therefore did not have grounds standing to sue, because they determined that it was a work made for hire and that Marvel, who originally commissioned the Iron Man theme in the 70s, actually owned the right. So as I think we've talked about before, a work made for hire is an item where if under certain circumstances, a company hires someone for a job, under certain conditions, the company is the author, is the de jure, or according to the law, author of that piece, even though they didn't actually do any of the composing, because they paid for it, because they directed what you can do with it, or what the author can do with the piece, that they are actually, by law, the author. This case used what's called the instance and expense test, which asks if did the employer induce the creation of the work and have the right to direct and supervise the manner in which the work is carried out. And they found that after reviewing the facts, they found that, yeah, you know what, Marvel did do that. They reviewed the facts, which were that the composer wanted to create songs for Marvel Superheroes, which was the show at the time. You know, and after he reviewed the comic books and he composed a few themes, he submitted it to Lee's approval, who, of course, Stan Lee, who was directing Marvel at the time. And after those songs were accepted, they were like, oh, we like these. Here's $3,000. Make another one. Make us a theme for Iron Man. So they looked at those facts and they're like, okay, well, you know, we're going to determine that to be work made for hire. But in a dispute in the 90s, which is 20 years afterwards, Marvel and Jack agreed that Jack owned the pieces, that they were only a licensee. The two parties, not to this lawsuit, but to a previous instance, Jack, Urbant, and Marvel agreed that, hey, you know, Jack, you own this and we're the licensee. And then out of nowhere, this judge decides, you know what, even though you guys agreed otherwise, I'm going to look at the facts and circumstances here and determine that I don't agree. It was a work made for hire. Jack, you're not the author. Case dismissed.
Yeah, because Jack now suddenly, Mr. Urbant here has no standing to sue. He's not the exclusive rights holder in the eyes of the court. And basically, you know, what started out as a relatively straightforward sampling lawsuit, basically, now has become a work for hire potential shift here, because as you said, Marvel and Urbant reached an agreement saying that Urbant owned the work. They called Urbant the owner, and Marvel called itself the licensee in that settlement. And the U.S. Copyright Office awarded Urbant a registration for the work under his name in 1990. And it might not sound like it means much, because like, oh, anyone can register a copyright, but it's still supposed to represent prima facie evidence of ownership. It's supposed to be that, you know what I mean, that evidence of ownership that has to be disproved. And it doesn't sound like Marvel has done anything to try to stand up and say that they own it. Marvel has not interjected at all. They're just sitting quietly on the sidelines, getting handed a potential significant victory here, because as this article in the Hollywood Reporter points out, through most of the 60s and 70s, Marvel kind of operated in this hippie collective of, let's all just get together and make magic happen, and yeah, we'll sort out the details later. And yeah, that's kind of like how the internet works now in a lot of ways. You know, you think of all the writers who have done blogging like that. Well,
you know, this may be good now for Sony, but who knows if they've awoken a sleeping giant here, because I'm sure if Marvel can get its documents together, which, as you mentioned, may not be possible because of how they functioned back in the 70s, then this judge may have cleared the way for them to just jump right into the plaintiff's shoes here and be like, oh, we're suing too. We're the owner? Sure.
Yeah,
Sony.
Jumping. Tagging.
Yeah.
It's like the worst WWE tag team match in history is what it could be. And so, yeah, it's really, really kind of a bizarre case because typically speaking, you only think of work for hire, and yes, you do have the test you described, but typically you think of work for hire in terms of full-time employees. That's the most common way of it.
So go ahead.
Though with freelancers, there is a way to have freelance work if it meets it's got to be of a certain type. There's like a list of like 20 different types. I'm not even going to start rambling them off, but it includes pretty much everything you could reasonably think of at the end of the day. It even includes like cartography.
Right. So if you're not an employee working within the scope of your employment, because that's the first way, and that's the way you alluded to. The second way is that if you're an independent contractor, and a work is commissioned that is supposed to be part or a contribution to a collective work, like a motion picture or an audiovisual work, etc. And there's a list there's a qualifying list that you mentioned. That work then becomes a working for hire as well, because you can't be making part A of if there's parts A through Z, right, and then all of a sudden you want to independent ownership of that. It kind of messes up everyone's situation, because you can't be going to 9 or 10 different authors every 35 years to make sure that you still have ownership, and that dilutes the renewal rights.
Yeah, but the thing about that is you're supposed to, according to the law, have the agreement beforehand, before you start the project, before you start the work. That's what you're trying to do. My understanding was that there has to be an agreement in writing beforehand, and there's no indication Urbant signed such an agreement before he started work, which, of course, brings the work for hire thing more up in the air. It doesn't necessarily, I guess, as we're finding out, kill it, but it definitely tosses up. This is why you get stuff in writing, people. This is why you don't do the hippy-dippy commune stuff that Marvel was doing in the 60s and 70s. This is the reason right here, so that there is at least certainty in who owns what. And that's what we don't have, because this article mentions Urbant has already submitted a motion for reconsideration, which is a duh moment. And it's probably going to be appealed if the reconsideration request doesn't, by some miracle, if it, by some miracle, where the judge did reconsider and change his or her mind. I don't remember which it was. That would be a miracle, but failing that miracle, I think we're going to see an appeal too.
Right. You thought the ownership was settled here because they had an agreement, but you just never know.
Yeah, I mean, and that's literally what's so amazing about it to me is here we are, almost 50 years after this work was created. It was created in the 60s. Now we're having to decide the ownership of it, even after an agreement and a settlement and a copyright registration. It seems kind of crazy, but here we are, Here we are. This is why you get it in writing.
Yeah, and that's why they filed a motion for reconsideration, and that's why people are talking about it.
Yeah, and this really could be a radical shift for
I think that brings us, John.
Yeah, it really could. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it could be a radical shift for work for hire, especially for like independent contractors that do on the internet today, that do blogging and journalism and other things, and maybe think that they have copyright and hold ownership of their material. They might not, So get it in writing, folks. Just get it in writing. God.
Right. Obviously, the biggest, I think, shift would be the potential for people to make work for hire arguments when you're not, when you're a third party and that someone else actually owns it, and being able to revisit the circumstances in which someone else's contract was written and someone else's agreement was done, and then interjecting an argument that, oh, you don't have standing because you don't actually own this, and being able to make that argument even though the two parties that were into the agreement have seen otherwise.
Yeah. But
you're right. I think you made some good points there too. And this brings us to the next story that I think you talked about too. I do dabble in Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones.
And
this is an older story, but it's interesting because the site Torrent Freak does a weekly most pirated TV shows and movies thing, and it's like never fails. Game of Thrones is almost always #1, especially when it's ongoing. Game of Thrones numero uno, most pirated thing out there. Well, this time around, things got a little bit additionally worse for Game of Thrones, as 4 of this season's 10 episodes appeared on piracy sites before any of them had aired. Before the first episode had aired, 4 of them were available on sites like the Pirate Bay for free download. Apparently, these were ultra low resolution, ultra low quality versions. I don't know how much people really care about that, but yeah.
Here's my take on it. Obviously, the numbers were staggering. 1 million downloads before the first episode airs is really bad for ratings, and it's bad for television generally. I think a lot of people were talking about the impact on the availability or the impact on the impact of things like HBO Now, which was supposed to be the piracy eraser because you could watch it simultaneously, and people were questioning the viability of this as a piracy fighting tool. And I have to say that it absolutely does not. I think HBO Now is going to be fantastic for fighting piracy. And the reason why so many people downloaded this Game of Thrones package is that, it's to draw an analogy, is that this is what happens when you make heroin available to drug addicts. People love Game of Thrones that much. Mm-hmm. They want it, and they want it always, and they want it now. And so if you make 4 episodes available, they're going to take it. And for maybe some other programs where it's not a rabid fan base who just want to consume as much as possible, HBO Now is going to be good for piracy, because they're going to be like, you know what, I do want to watch that, and I'll watch it when it comes out rather than pirate it because I'm not itching for it. Game of Thrones is just one of these exceptions that it's so popular and so rabid that people just want to consume it so quickly that a leak can be devastating. And This is just a lesson. Just do extra due diligence, because apparently this was leaked from someone who had legitimate access to it, which I guess it always was, but it was a trusted third party, and hopefully they know who it was, and hopefully they can weed that company or business out of their dealings.
Yeah, it seems like it was a review copy. It seems to be what some people are saying. It was a low-quality review copy sent out to screeners. So that seems possible, at least. But yeah, I'm totally with you about HBO Now. There are some limitations to HBO Now in its current incarnation. Right now, it's only available in the U.S. That's a pretty big one. And it's only available on iOS devices, which for Android users and Windows Phone users, all 5 of them are probably very disappointed. But to me,
I did not know that. I guess as an American iOS user, I just got lucky that I can access it. I didn't know those.
Didn't we just discuss that you're not American, Canadian, Mr. Kilometers per hour?
I'm based in the U.S., so
I know. You're ruining the fun, though. But no, the other thing about it, though, with this leak is something to think about. As I said, Game of Thrones is the most pirated TV show out there, and possibly one of the most, if not the most pirated thing out there. That means that there are people out there who only pirate Game of Thrones. By sheer numbers, that's what that has to mean. Somebody out there that pirates nothing else in the world pirates Game of Thrones. That's the dedication of this. And that also means those people are probably going to pirate these leaked episodes too. So, yeah, it's like you said, it puts it out there, and it's a huge hit. And it's a huge hit to the start for HBO Now, because they were trying to time the launch of it with Game of Thrones. That's how big of a deal HBO Now and Game of Thrones are, that they were timed together, They made sure they got HBO Now out there in the wild before Game of Thrones new season started. So, yeah, this really is a very devastating leak. I would say it's as devastating as the Expendables 3 leak in that regard, even though it's less time. The Expendables 3 leak was 3 weeks ahead, but then again, episode 4 is out, 4 weeks ahead? So, I don't know.
But I I have a conspiracy theory if you want to hear
Uh-oh.
it, John.
All right, all right. I do not
So
have a. Hang on a second. I feel like I should have a tinfoil hat. I'll have to use a.
get it
paper
on.
one. I have a paper one though. It'll have to do. Go ahead.
So, Game of Thrones, or execs at HBO, purposely leaked these 4 episodes, kind of in the way that someone who would want to rid a city of a drug problem would leak a bad batch of something. Because now that the Game of Thrones junkies, who myself included, got 4 episodes in a row and watched them all that day, they have to like wait a month because the episodes aren't, the rest of the season isn't there, so they have to wait a month with no Game of Thrones, and they have to go through this withdrawal. So after they consume, it's like they ate something bad. Like, oh, why did I do that? While everyone else is enjoying it week by week, as to discourage piracy in the future, and that's my Game of Thrones.
It's like when you catch your son smoking and you make him smoke the whole pack at once, or something like that, and teach him a lesson.
Something like that.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I can see that, and HBO. This is one of the things about HBO that's always been kind of interesting to me is they have probably, like I said, the most pirated thing on the planet. Probably, I'm pretty sure, all taken on average, it probably is. They've never been particularly aggressive with the anti-piracy efforts. We've seen they've done some effort with HBO Now to kill VPNs. We've seen odds and ends here and there, but never like Voltage Pictures going lawsuit crazy type thing. They've never been super aggressive about it. And so, that might lead a little credence to that conspiracy theory. But yeah, it's just a conspiracy theory. I'm pretty sure, given the nature of the leak, it did come from a third party without their consent on any level. But still, that is an interesting way of looking at it.
If I had to guess about that HBO philosophy, I would guess it has something to do with having no advertisers, and so the ratings end up being less important because their revenue is subscription based. So maybe a lot of these pirates either don't have cable, etc.
Yeah. And they're looking at the Venn diagram of people who are pirating their content and the people who can afford their content, and not seeing a lot of overlap.
Possibly.
I can imagine they've done their studies and they're not feeling too much of a pinch yet because of it. But okay, consent decrees. ASCAP and BMI, the 2 largest performing rights organizations in the country, 2 of the big 3, the other being CSAC. And now you have Global Music Rights hanging out there and doing something that no one's quite sure what. But the 2 main ones, ASCAP and BMI, are covered by consent decrees from the Justice Department. But now, Justice Department may be reconsidering those consent decrees, which, though they have been updated multiple times in the past 50 years, have not seen a significant overhaul, we'll say. And so this could radically change the way music licensing is handled in the United States. And now, previously, by the way, we were talking about the actual performing artists. Now we're talking about the composers and the composition side of things, just to clarify. Because, like, hey, weren't you just talking about these guys? No, we're not. There's 2 copyrights in every song, the composition and the recording. Now we're on the composition side. Just because it's so easy to understand. So simple.
A few highlights here. Rate courts have ruled that consent decrees allow publishers who represent the composers to either completely withdraw all of their songs for all licensing, or they were forced to allow access to their entire catalogs under the rumored changes from the Department of Justice. Publishers would now be able to withdraw and then cut direct digital deals with third parties, parts of their catalogs, but then still use performance rights organizations for administrative payments to its songwriters. That was one of them. The Department of Justice is also considering the imposition of a negotiated interim rate to be set immediately when a digital service requests a license, before that service can begin playing that music. As it stands now, when a digital service requests a license, they can immediately begin serving that music. or playing that music. And then when the interim rate is set, they kind of pay it back. But it also kind of, that system leaves really little incentive to negotiate.
Yeah,
on
in
the
fact, it leaves
publishers,
every incentive to
and the performing rights organizations.
It leaves every incentive to drag out the negotiations. And what a lot of the PRs have been saying is that you got all these digital companies that sort of pop into existence. They say, hey, we want a license. They have to grant one. They drag out the negotiations. And by the time the negotiations make any headway or before it's about to go to a rate court, the company goes out of business and disappears, never having paid a cent in royalties to anyone. And that's kind of been a recurring theme. And the real issue here, if you're these PROs and you're the composers in general, the publishers in general, this used to be kind of a side business in a way. This used to be just a part of the picture, if you will, because they did not handle the mechanical licensing. In fact, they were strictly forbidden from doing it by the consent decrees. So basically, all the stuff that dealt with, the publication and the printing and the direct sale went on elsewhere. Well, guess what? With streaming
services, isn't that something they're talking about as well?
Yeah, exactly. They're trying to fix that, so now the PROs can handle mechanical licenses as well. That's also one of the highlights of this. And so the idea is the realization that, hey, this is all becoming sort of a unified business. With Spotify, the lines between owning and playing a music in a store, all of it's getting blurred, those blurred lines. And the idea is that we're going to bring it all together so that it basically can be handled under one roof, and also give the publishers more flexibility to negotiate, because they're no longer negotiating the position of power they had in the 60s and so when these consent decrees were signed.
Yeah, this could be a huge landscape shifting move. And, I look forward to talking about it more when it's more than
just the rumor,
the stirrings.
It's kind of rumor-like right now, but it's definitely interesting to think about the potential changes it's going to have over the next few years.
Yeah. So, do you want to talk about Grooveshark, or do you want to talk about the copyright infringement case with browser app agreements?
Let's start with browser app. Browser app entertains me to no end.
Sure.
There's a site called Ripoff Report, which is quite controversial for many reasons. But they sparked a little copyright controversy here when a group of people led by Richard Gorin, who apparently posted a review on the site, and then requested that his review be removed on copyright grounds, basically saying, hey, I own this review. I know I posted it, but now I'd like to pull it down, please. It's mine. Well, basically, Ripoff Report has a copyright transfer as part of its posting process. When you go through it, you agree, at least supposedly, to transfer all copyright to Ripoff Report. And one of the reasons they do that is so that you can't come back and force them to remove reports later, specifically so they don't have to do this. Well, they argue that they never actively agreed to it, and a copyright transfer in particular has to be an agreement between the two parties. Well, long and short of it is the judge ruled that while the terms of service on Ripoff Report is quote-unquote browser app, meaning never actually agreed to, the portion pertaining to the copyright transfer is presented in big, bold letters at one of the steps of posting it, and that you do have to actively agree to that portion of it, meaning that part is perfectly valid. So ruling in favor of Ripoff Report.
So I've got two main comments here. The first one being copyright in a review of a business. That strikes me as something like maybe the founders did not intend to exist. Like, you reviewed a business and that is somehow creative enough to be granted copyright. It must have been a hell of a review for this to happen, because I don't. When I write a Yelp review, copyright is not the last thing I'm thinking about. So, interesting. The second one, the whole browser app situation. So, for our listeners who may not know, there's generally 3 different ways in which you can become subject to an agreement when you are online. There is a shrink wrap agreement, which you only become bound by the terms when you actually use the product. So oftentimes in this case, the product that you order online will literally be wrapped in something that once you open, you have now agreed to it. There'll be some warning about you agreeing to the terms once it's opened. The second one is called a click wrap, which is generally the best way to do it if you're a business, is that the user becomes bound by the terms when they click on the link saying yes.
This is related to the second biggest lie on the internet, which is I have read and agreed to the terms of service.
Yeah, I know we're for sure going to get to that, right? Is that who actually does it, and the whole South Park episode about
and of course, the biggest lie on the internet, by the way, is lol.
So yeah, click wrap. When you click I have read, and then browse wrap, which is the most controversial, which we dealt with here, is that you become bound by the terms of the website merely by visiting the website, which sounds preposterous, right? Is that all I've done is go to your website? Why should I be bound by a contract? I haven't done anything.
That was displayed in the little terms of service link way down at the bottom, and it was like the same color as the background, and yada yada.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why it's the most controversial. Is that back in the early days of the internet, people would really push their luck by putting outrageous terms of service down at the bottom of the website where no one ever knew, and then when those got to court, they were thrown out because judges aren't stupid, and they know what's right and they know what's wrong, and they'll find a way to make things right when they know that from an equitable perspective they're wrong. So even though their browse wrap agreements can be legitimate under certain circumstances, generally you're told, or the best practice is to embolden them, make them red, and make them in a positive location, and not, like you alluded to, at the bottom of a website. So interestingly enough, the judge said that even though the terms and conditions were kind of inconspicuous and they were kind of not ideal when it comes to upholding a browse wrap agreement, the pertinent part of that browse wrap agreement, the copyright ownership, or at least part of that part, was like right in the center of the screen when the user was told to accept the terms and conditions. So the judge found that the person should have been on, quote, inquiry notice, which is kind of a fancy way of saying when you saw this,
you should have known.
You should have known. You should have known that there was this browse wrap agreement, and because this part of it was at the center of the screen at the right time, we're going to hold that you should have had constructive notice. Or, I'm sorry, we're going to impose constructive notice, which is basically saying that even though you did not have actual notice, you did not know, a reasonable person would have known. And so, tough luck. Yeah.
And for the record, there is one kind of way you can find yourself bound by a license, if you will, on your content, and that's an implied license. It might have some, and it has some bearing in this case, because he was trying to argue that his posting was under an implied license, which basically said my actions indicated I intended for this license. But as you're saying, the judge said, here we have an actual contract and an actual license being formed by this browse wrap that overrules and sort of takes over for whatever implied license you thought you were granting in this case.
Exactly.
And so here you go. And I've got to say this, Ripoff Report, we don't talk about them a lot on this site, but they're very interesting if you're into Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act and to the limitations of liability it provides. It's actually a really interesting case study. They have been sued and they have I think they've never lost in court, actually. So they have an amazing track record in the courts and a very interesting case study if you're fascinated by that area of law.
All right, I've got an introduction for our next story, John, if you wouldn't mind.
Go for it. Godspeed, good sir.
So from the look on your face, I'm gathering that you may not have watched The Three's Company.
Oh, I watched it, actually. No, I know it. I was a little bit surprised because we got our stories out of order. That's the only reason I was surprised. But Three's Company. We can do Three's Company. It's okay. I'll move the show notes around. We can do it live.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. But yeah, no, that's no. But
So,
Three's. I'm like, what does Three's Company have to do with? Oh, no. Yes, Three's Company. Yes, no. I watched it. John Ritter is the man, and the only reason that show is worth anything, frankly. But he is
so
brilliant comedic
uh,
genius.
before we move on to Grooveshark, which is the story
Yeah.
that I see now we were intended to move on, we're going to briefly do a ruling on a Three's Company parody. 3C, a play that parodies Three's Company, was found to be fair use.
Yes.
Because, as the judge noted, it was highly transformative, which is one of the more important elements of the fair use analysis. And I had a really good quote from this case from the judge I really liked, which is that, quote, "The law is agnostic between creators and, quote, infringers, favoring only creativity and the harvest of knowledge." And what he's trying to say is that, you know, when we're doing the fair use analysis, we're going to end up siding on the side which would promote the dissemination of knowledge and increased creativity, which isn't always siding with the people who made the item, because obviously what we hear all the time and what we've heard the Supreme Court say, which is that, you know, copyright you know, increases creativity because it allows people to monetize their work and monetize their creation. Yeah. But at the end of the day, when a certain use can be considered to you know, harvest knowledge and increase creativity and not really remove any incentive from the original creator, we're going to side with them. And that's what they found here, was that this case was a great parody. It was a transformative. You know, the original copyright owners of Three's Company were never going to make a play parody with a gay lead to, you know, to kind of cast a light on society and a light on the original show, which was the case here. I didn't really get to that. The 3C was about what if the lead was gay and the landlord actually predator. You know, those were the little things I read about it. And then they ended up finding fair use because of how it's different and satirical the play was.
Yeah, Three's Company was really a show all about lies, because the lead, John Ritter, was pretending to be gay for the purpose of being allowed to stay. That's the only way he was going to be allowed to stay in the apartment, basically, in the home. But also about people appearing to be something they're not, and the comedic hijinks that comes from that. And 3C was like, well, what if everyone was what they said they were and appeared to be, basically. The whole show, everyone is exactly what they appear to be, and then you make a play around that, was the idea. And yeah, the judge ruled it was a parody. Now, it's very interesting. Did you follow the Adult Wednesday Addams thing that's going on right now? Did you hear about that?
Enlighten me.
Well, there was a series on YouTube, pretty well done actually, entitled Adult Wednesday Addams, and the whole premise of it was that Wednesday Addams is no longer a kid; she's an adult, and here's her misadventures. Basically, a series of them. Like one involved her, one that became viral recently involved her getting revenge on catcallers, things like that. The whole series was recently removed from YouTube due to a copyright complaint by the actual T. and Charles Addams Foundation, people who owned the copyright in the original comic strip and therefore the characters, going all the way back to, I think it was the New Yorker comic strips that the Addams family was sort of born from. So yeah, it's a similar situation where you have a critical twist on an original work, and in this case, it was ruled to be a parody. Now, I'm not saying the Adult Wednesday Addams things would a fair use. In this case, it was ruled to be a fair use. I'm not saying that's what would happen with the Adult Wednesday Addams. It's a different set of facts. You got to analyze it differently, but still, it just shows that these parodies, when you're going off and basing your work on another one, even as a parody, you know, you're taking a big risk.
Yeah. You know, some of the critical elements in parodies that you have to actually be, you have to actually be parodying some of the themes and elements of the show. You can't just be, you know, making a comment on society and using someone else's creative outlet to do so. Usually,
Otherwise,
a good parody also. yeah, a good parody also kind of points out the flaws in the original product.
Yeah. But so yeah, it's an interesting ruling. It's fascinating, and it deals with a show that, like I said, I actually watched a fair amount of growing up. So I was into the old TV shows. I Dream of Jeannie, Three's Company. I watched way more of that stuff than I did, television from the 80s and early 90s. It's kind of bizarre. I can't tell you much about like Friends and so forth, but I can tell you a great deal about Three's Company. So, I don't know if I was raised right or raised wrong. Well, Grooveshark.
No comments.
But anyway,
You
yeah,
know,
Grooveshark. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
what did I watch growing up? Man, probably neither one of those. I grew up watching The X-Files,
Mm-hmm.
one of my favorites. My dad was always really into Star Trek, so I was definitely
yes.
watching a lot of that
Original
as a kid.
series and the Next Generation for me. I watched a lot of TNG.
Yeah, The Next Generation, not the original,
Okay.
was one of my childhood staples. And I don't know, I'll have to think about that. But yeah, Grooveshark. What happened in Grooveshark, John?
Yeah, long and short of it is they have been sued. I love the little image with this article. I think it's about perfect because it shows a shark with headphones with like 5 harpoons sticking through it, and it's bleeding and obviously in a lot of pain. And it must be exactly how it feels. And basically, right now, it is it's being sued on multiple fronts, and we have 2 lawsuits that are actually going on. This article talks about the lawsuit with EMI, in which a judge ruled it no longer qualifies for safe harbor and has found that basically it's potentially liable for up to $150,000 per infringement for some 2,807 EMI owned songs. And yeah, basically, with this one, the ruling here basically centers around DMCA Safe Harbor. DMCA stands for Digital Millennium Copyright Act, and the Safe Harbor refers to the safe harbors that sites that host content for users like YouTube or Facebook, etc., have that defend them against infringement claims when their users do naughty things, which inevitably happens. And so why the DMCA basically sets a set of criteria. The host has to have a person to receive notices of copyright infringement. It has to work expeditiously to remove them. And it also has to have a policy in place to ban repeat infringers. Well, that element right there seems to be the big hang-up for Grooveshark, because it's saying its policy for removing repeat infringers was wholly inadequate.
Yeah, this case reminds me of that Robin Williams meme, or I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, meme, whatever. What year is it?
Yeah.
This case is it's a 2007 and 2008 case about free infringer policies. Like you should know by now, especially if you're a major player, what it takes to gain DMCA protection and safe harbor. Sure, some of the bad actors have found a way to sort of deflect DMCA liability, and a few bad cases have come out as to what constitutes a good or bad repeat infringer policy, and what you have to do to make sure that copyright owners can contact you. But it's not that expensive to have a good repeat infringer policy, and it's not that expensive to have an email at the bottom instructing you where and how to contact you for a DMCA takedown request. This is their own fault, and unless this case relates to actions from 6 or 7 years ago, which it may. I didn't.
I think it does actually, in part because EMI and Grooveshark have been going at it since EMI was actually a separate company.
Okay. Well, if that's the case, then maybe
there is some
I was
leeway
wrong there. But unless this is like dealing with instances from like pre-2008 or 2009, maybe even 2010, I would be really disappointed in whoever their legal representation is.
Yeah, and I agree. And it's interesting because this case is going on, and we also have news in another one dealing with Universal, which now owns EMI. Universal has a separate lawsuit going on. What you got?
Sorry, John. I now remember why I thought that. Is that I remember reading in the article that they now plan to implement a new three-strike system, which made me think that their current system was the one
that
under
actually makes a lot of sense.
scrutiny.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, actually. And they might have been trying to, not change the system for a fear of appearing guilty. Maybe what's going on. It may have just been that they've held on to that system for way too long now because of that. But yeah, Universal sued them. And what's interesting is Universal stripped their DMCA safe harbor compliance by proving it was Grooveshark employees themselves that uploaded thousands of the tracks. And so now that's going into the damages phase, which we're looking at. There was an article today that potentially $736 million in damages. If you multiply out the $150,000 maximum, which is, of course, never going to be reached. You can forget about that. But theoretical maximum of $736 million in damages. Just so, yeah. But between those two lawsuits, I think Grooveshark's not looking too good.
Not too shabby.
No, and besides, have you ever tried to use Grooveshark? It sucks. Get Spotify. Seriously, Spotify, Tidal, anything. Grooveshark sucks, too. I just don't understand how it's still around.
I know we're not talking about Tidal today, but I've been following a few stories here and there. So I think I just on Reddit about how it's apparently flopping. I can't really. I don't. I've seen the titles that it's a spectacular.
Yeah, basically what they did is they took
the articles.
Yeah, they took a look because when Tidal was relaunched, remember Jay-Z relaunched the service. When it was relaunched, it like shot to 1 and 2 or something like really high up in the App Store listings, and it has since dropped, pretty much clean out. Which that may or may not be an indication of how well the service is doing financially. To be honest with you, that's just an indication when people are downloading the app. And also, apparently, Tidal is making, this is something I found interesting. They're making accusations that Apple is intentionally delaying updates of the service in order to better promote Beats music, which is supposed to be launching sometime this summer. So, yeah. I don't know why they would be working so hard to screw Tidal and not Spotify. Because that seems like, you're stepping on the smaller person here right now. You're stepping on the lower thread. So I don't understand the logic behind that particular conspiracy. That's another paper hat moment for me, I think, in a way. But yeah, so it's interesting. Yeah, they've definitely fallen out of the rankings. I'm not sure if that really means anything in the long run. But I'll say this: I did the Tidal 30-day trial and canceled on day 26. So, I'm one of the people that walked out on them. So there you go.
Right. I think we discussed that. For your purposes of jogging, Spotify did the job for half the price.
Yeah, it's perfectly fine. It has really great clear audio, especially if you increase the bit rate. And honestly, I need my Metallica, and it's not in Tidal at all. It's in Spotify, and it's interesting because I just earlier today put a tweet out complaining that Spotify was making every other Metallica song from Saint Anger, and I have no idea why they're pulling anything from that album. I mean, I don't hate it like some Metallica fans do, but come on, you have the whole freaking catalog. Why does every other one have to be from Saint Anger?
You have to start thumb downing, or you have to start disliking, or I'd like to customize away from.
Yeah, that's what I should do. Really, is build a Metallica playlist. Take the time and do that. But basically, what I was doing was I was opening up the Metallica's artist page and hitting shuffle, and every other track was Saint Anger, literally every other track. I'm not even exaggerating. It was literally every other track. It was very frustrating for a while there. But
John, I think you have managed to really take the cake on I would say, a hashtag first world problem.
Yeah, I know.
It's like, if you think about that meme, it's like, I shuffled my favorite artist, and it's only playing songs from my least favorite album.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's not my least favorite album. It's got Lulu in there, so it's not my least favorite album. It's like my second least favorite album.
My second least favorite album. The humanity,
I'm not helping my
John.
case, am I? I'm not helping my case.
I know the Nepalese earthquake is bad, but that must take the cake. Your Metallica.
I win first world problems for the day. You are absolutely right. Oh man, that's
Yes, the humanity of having to create a playlist. So
go through all
the
the
swan
trouble.
song for Aereo and for our podcast for today's podcast is Aereo settling the suits and take it away.
Yeah, basically, we all remember Aereo, TV streaming service, bunch of tiny antennas, one per customer, claimed that they were not copyright infringing
Vaguely
because
familiar.
yeah, they're complaining that they were not copyright infringing because they were just renting antennas, and they actually won some lower court rulings, did pretty good in the district courts and the appellate courts, but they got the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says basically if it looks like a cable service and smells like a cable service, it's a cable service, and blammo, it's now infringing because it's not paying royalties to broadcasters. And they went bankrupt. They filed for bankruptcy after that because they had no business model at all, and they had no way of getting extra loans or anything. So then who's going to convince investors to put money in a company that just lost at the Supreme Court? And they sold all of their assets. They only got like a measly $2 million, I think it was, which, considering they were planning on getting at least $4 million, looked kind of pathetic. And now apparently they have agreed to pay the broadcasters $950,000 of that money to resolve copyright claims totaling more than $99 million. That's not even 10 cents on every dollar. Not even.
It sounds like more like it's 1 cent on every dollar.
That's right. 1 cent. You're right. It is 1 cent. My math sucks. It's less than a penny on the dollar. You are correct. I suck at math. I failed math today, and I won first world problems. Yes, go team. I'm really kicking butt today. Oh man, but yeah. So yeah, it's less than a penny on the dollar to settle the claims, and it's that's it. The only step that remains is the bankruptcy court has to approve it. But given that there was copyright claims totaling $99 million, I'm pretty sure they're the lead debtor in this case. They're the largest, at least, And so that pretty much brings an end.
Yeah, that's a good question. Who gets paid first?
I really don't know how that works in this. I don't know enough about bankruptcy law to tell you.
Next week on Copyright 2.0 show, a bankruptcy lawyer specialist telling us who gets money in Aereo.
Exactly. If you are a bankruptcy attorney and would like to offer comments on this, please tweet at me at Plagiarism Today and offer some clear guidance here. But it seems likely that it will be approved and that it'll be the end of the copyright law. This will be the end of the copyright lawsuit, barring some kind of shocker from the bankruptcy court. So yeah, that's the end of it. Any final thoughts on Aereo or anything else?
That brings us to the end of our show.
Yeah, any final thoughts? Anything you want to share?
My final thoughts are that these aren't my final. Yeah, well, my final thoughts, like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, is that this will not be the final time we talk about Aereo.
Okay, so you're convinced Aereo will come up again.
Situations.
Yeah, honestly, I think
so. I think
if we talk about Aereo again, it's going to be them launching another service called Aereo. I don't think who was it? Was it was like Dish that bought them? It was Dish Network or someone like that bought out the naming rights. So I have a feeling whoever bought it maybe plans to do something down the road, like a Napster-like thing. But Aereo, the company as we know it, I think this will probably be the last time. We might mention the name again, but it will not be the same Aereo.
Fair.
Well, on that note, everyone, my name is Jonathan. Okay. My name is Jonathan Bailey. I'm from the site Plagiarism Today, which can be found at plagiarismtoday.com. And you can find me as username Plagiarism Today at all the places: Facebook, Twitter, Google+, Instagram. Probably have that hanging out there. I don't think I have a Pinterest. Oh, wait, yes, I do. I actually have a Pinterest. I just haven't actually used it. So, yes, Plagiarism Today at all the places. And Evan needs a site.
And my name is Evan Sherris. You can find me at Evan Sherris on Twitter and never on my own website because just not that vain. And we will see you guys next time.
Art connoisseur Evan Sherris will have to establish a site for his art collection, which is rapidly growing. It's up over 100% since the last time I saw him. Actually, it's up infinity in percent, I believe. can't divide by 0. Anyways, on that
0
note,
to 1.
yeah, exactly. This is why I'm not the math expert. On that note, everyone, thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you guys next week.